Chad thought his prank would go down in history. He tried to trip a guard in front of a crowd. But within seconds, everything went wrong. He ended up crashing onto the pavement amid roars of laughter, with cameras capturing his humiliation. But that was just the beginning. London, the square in front of Buckingham Palace. The air buzzed with a mix of voices, the clicking of cameras, and the excited murmur of tourists eagerly soaking in the atmosphere of British formality and grandeur. At the center of attention stood a royal guard, a tall man with an icy, emotionless face, dressed in the iconic red uniform with gold buttons and the famous bearskin hat. He was completely still, as if carved from stone. His stillness was mesmerizing. To some, it was a symbol of historical greatness. To others, a mere tourist attraction. And among the spectators, there was one man who saw it as nothing more than an opportunity for cheap entertainment. This man stood out, not just because of his loud voice, but because of his sheer size. He was huge, a towering figure with a massive belly straining against a white t-shirt that was clearly too small for him. His stretched, worn-out jeans sagged at the waist, barely held up by an overstretched belt. His face was flushed. Whether from the heat or the alcohol, it was hard to tell. His name was Chad, a stereotypical American tourist who believed the world existed solely for his amusement. Having already downed a few beers, he was in that state where the volume of his voice automatically increased, and the line between funny and pathetic blurred beyond recognition. "These guys are robots, man. They don't even flinch." Chad's booming laughter echoed through the crowd. He jabbed a fat finger toward the guard's face as if testing whether he was even alive. The crowd chuckled quietly. Some tourists glanced at Chad disapprovingly, while others just shrugged, but no one dared to openly challenge him. Chad sensed his moment. The audience was watching, and he wasn't about to let them look away. "Watch this, bro. This will go viral," he whispered to his friend, who was already holding up his phone, recording. A flicker of excitement crossed Chad's eyes. The thirst for cheap fame, the kind that ignites when a drunk man starts feeling like the king of the moment. And then he did something no one else would have dared to do. With a movement so subtle it seemed casual, Chad extended his bulky leg forward, right into the path of the marching guard. The crowd went silent. Some tourists even held their breath, realizing that this wasn't just stupidity. It was outright disrespect. The question hung in the air. What happens next? Chad, however, wasn't thinking about consequences. He was already picturing the royal guard stumbling, crashing to the ground as the crowd erupted in laughter. He imagined the applause, the millions of TikTok views, the headlines, "Fat American Trolls Royal Guard." But reality always has a way of delivering unexpected answers. Chad had no idea that in just a few seconds his name would become a meme. The guard marched forward, his boots echoing rhythmically against the stone pavement. He moved with clockwork precision, his face as expressionless as a statue. Around him, the tourists watched in admiration. His discipline, composure, and military posture stood as a symbol of British resilience. To Chad, though, the guard was just a clown in a red suit. His drunken mind spun with one thought. He's just an actor. A dude in a silly costume, that's all. He had no respect for tradition or military honor. He just wanted a laugh, a viral moment, the spotlight. As the heavy military boot approached his trap, Chad smirked inwardly. He was already imagining the YouTube and TikTok headlines. "Fat American makes British Guard fall. Royal Guard fail." The crowd would gasp. The guard would crash, humiliated. And Chad would be the hero of the moment, basking in glory. But he miscalculated. As soon as the guard's boot collided with Chad's thick ankle, reality hit. Something was very, very wrong. Instead of tripping, the soldier didn't stumble at all. He didn't even slow down. But Chad. The steel-toed military boot, solid and unyielding, struck Chad's leg like a battering ram. The impact sent a shock-wave of pain straight to the bone. "Arrgh!" Chad screamed. The crowd fell into stunned silence for just a fraction of a second. And then everything spiraled out of control, the stupidity that became his downfall. Chad howled in pain, doubling over, flailing his arms wildly to regain his balance. But it was no use. His massive body tilted like a sinking ship. First, he dropped to one knee, grimacing as pain shot up his leg. Then he tried to stand, but his balance was gone. His thick arms flailed in the air as if grasping for something invisible, but it was too late. Thud! The ground shook as his massive frame slammed onto the pavement. For a moment, just a moment, there was silence. And then the crowd erupted. "Bloody idiot!" someone from the British tourists yelled. "Serves him right," another voice chimed in. "That's karma, mate." Phones were already recording, cameras clicking, laughter building like a tidal wave. People pointed at him, some even clapping. The shame that went viral. Chad slowly lifted his head. His skull rang from the impact. The air around him felt burning hot. But louder than anything else, one realization echoed in his mind. They weren't laughing at the guard. They were laughing at him. He wasn't the hero of the video. He was the punchline. Rage boiled inside him. His heart pounded in his ears. His chest burned with a mix of humiliation and fury. Suddenly he shot up to his feet, nostrils flaring. "You think you can kick me, huh? You think you're some kind of badass?" he shouted, his voice cracking with anger. But the guard didn't respond. He stood there, motionless, as if Chad didn't even exist. That was what drove Chad insane. His fists clenched. His jaw tightened so hard it ached. The crowd was watching. They weren't just laughing, they were waiting. "Say something, you damn mannequin!" Chad roared, stepping forward aggressively. But the guard didn't blink, and that was when Chad realized. He either walked away, humiliated in front of everyone, or he did something drastic to flip the script in his favor. The crowd was watching, phones were recording, and Chad wasn't about to leave as a loser. Chad was boiling. His face burned, sweat dripped down his temples, and his chest heaved with ragged, furious breaths. His massive body trembled with tension, fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. He stared at the motionless guard, who stood as still as a statue, as if nothing had happened. This silent figure, this pompous mannequin, this... "Say something, you damn mannequin!" Chad spat, his voice cracking with frustration. He stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over part of the crowd. His belly pushed forward with every breath, his eyes darting across the guard's face, searching for any flicker of reaction. But the soldier remained indifferent, as if Chad didn't exist. The crowd watched. Some had stopped laughing, now just observing in tense anticipation. Whispers spread through the audience, cameras still rolling, waiting to see what would happen next. Chad refused to lose. Not in front of them. Not in front of this empty-eyed dummy in a red coat. He took another step, now practically chest to chest with the guard, nostrils flaring. His sweaty, reddened face twisted with rage. And that's when he heard it. A sharp, heavy, precise step. Chad blinked. The crowd gasped. To his left, just behind him, there was movement. Chad turned, and his heart froze. A second guard, who had been standing quietly nearby, had stepped forward. His face was just as emotionless, but his presence had changed. Now, he was serious, and in his hands, a rifle. Sudden reckoning. For a moment, Chad didn't fully process what was happening. His overheated, beer-fogged brain struggled to keep up. The guard was holding a weapon. It wasn't pointed at him, but The mere fact that it was in his hands hit harder than any punch. "Stand back." The guard's voice was cold, deceptively calm. No threat, no emotion, just a command. The crowd gasped again, but this time it was different. The laughter that had filled the square vanished. It evaporated, leaving behind a deafening silence. Chad stood frozen. His legs suddenly felt weak, his stomach churned, his mouth went dry. He stared at the guard, not with defiance, but with something dangerously close to fear. Slowly, his hands went up. Whoa, man. I was just joking. Don't shoot," he stammered, stepping back. His voice, which had been loud and cocky just minutes ago, now sounded thin, almost pitiful. The guard didn't move. He just watched. A cold sweat ran down Chad's spine. Suddenly the heat was unbearable, his t-shirt sticking to his skin, his breathing uneven. And the crowd. They weren't laughing anymore. Now they were looking at him differently, with disgust. And somehow that was even worse than their laughter. The guard remained still, but his stance, his presence, everything about him screamed one thing: "You lost. Leave. Now." The guard said it evenly. No anger, no threat. Just an order. Short. Final. Undeniable. Chad didn't even try to argue. His body moved on its own, taking a step back, then another. His breath hitched, his fingers twitched like they were grasping for something. He had lost. The crowd knew it. He knew it. And there was only one thing left to do. Chad stumbled backward, his legs shaky, his heart hammering in his chest. His sweat-drenched palms clenched into fists, but it didn't help. The skin was so clammy that his fingers just stuck together. The crowd wasn't just laughing anymore. Now they were mocking, jeering, whistling, their words drilled into his skull, echoing like gunfire in his mind. "Yeah, Chad, now run! Go back to America!" someone shouted. And that was the breaking point. Something inside Chad snapped. The words lodged in his throat, his face burned, his chest tightened. Just a minute ago, he had raged, fumed, wanted to prove he wasn't a loser. But now, that's exactly what they saw. A fat, dumb, pathetic failure who tried to embarrass a British guard and ended up humiliating himself instead. His face burning red, he spun around and rushed away. But his size, his weight, his clumsy movements made every step awkward. He stumbled, nearly lost his balance, but he didn't stop. His belly jiggled, his sweat-soaked shirt clung to him, his face felt like it was on fire. He wasn't running because he was afraid. He was running because he couldn't stand their eyes on him any longer. "Run, fatty, run!" someone shouted, and that final burst of laughter was the last nail in his pride. The guard's composure, the crowd's triumph. As soon as Chad's lumbering figure disappeared around the corner, the crowd exploded into applause. Laughter, cheers, jeering. It was a celebration. The perfect show with the perfect ending. No one felt bad for Chad. No one defended him. He had brought it upon himself. "God save the Queen!" someone yelled, throwing their hands in the air. And now, the laughter wasn't cruel. Now it was pure victory. No one liked people like Chad. Loud, entitled, arrogant, thinking the world existed for their entertainment. And when people like that get exactly what they deserve, there's a special kind of satisfaction in that. Viral humiliation. Chad finally reached an alleyway, stopped, bent over, and gasped for air. His shirt was soaked, his legs trembled, his mouth felt like sandpaper. He had lost. Not just lost. He had lost in front of hundreds of people, and soon millions would see it. Because Chad had been right about one thing, the video went viral within hours. It spread across social media at lightning speed. TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, everywhere, and in the comments, his name became a joke. Never mess with the Queen's Guard. Instant karma at its finest. Lesson learned. Don't be a Chad. Memes flooded the internet. One edited his face onto a scene from The Lion King, replacing Simba's fall with Chad's. Another synced his humiliating retreat to the Benny Hill theme song. But the most viral meme was a simple 3-panel image. The guard. Chad lying flat on the ground. Text. Mission failed. Try again. Chad had wanted to be famous, and now he was, just not the way he planned.